So when you're ready. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the second day of our North Bend Budget Committee. We are going to resume the meeting from yesterday, and the first thing we have tonight is going to be public comment. And I'm going to read something for public comment here. And public comment, we want to thank you for participating in public comment this evening. The public comment period is an essential part of local government meetings. Each person has 3 minutes to speak. Our governing body takes the input into consider. However, in order to comply with Oregon open meeting laws, this isn't a time for dialogue, but rather a time for us to listen to you. Our city administrator and recorder are taking notes of action needed. And we do have public comment tonight. We have one here, and it's is it Heidi Fiegels? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, well, welcome.
I'm on 21. I'm trying to remember these out and figure out how I can read 25 questions for you in 3 minutes, but you know, I can do it all. I can do this. So I just have some really good questions, and this is all based off my observation last night and just a few notes that I took and the time that I took out in Grant Circle today in the sun to be creative and try to think of maybe something different that hasn't been mentioned and just get people to think differently a little bit. So question number one, is the 1.8 to 2 million quoted for the North Bend Community Center remodel something that could be reallocated to a more streamlined community center, such as that can be multifunctional? Two, is the budget for the library is the grant budget that is set in stone for only the community center? Are meetings and events that are generally held in that time frame that operate with the library's normal operation hours? So like, could you have your meetings instead of at the community center, like this meeting, we could just have it at the library instead of like spending 2 million on the gross building over there. We could just like put it into a baseball field or something instead. Maybe a water park for the kids in this area so they can learn how to swim. That'll come down here next. So number 4, what would be the total amount saved by the town if that switch was made? Why can't the fire trucks that are in excellent condition that you talked about being maintained as they've been excellently maintained? Why can't we continue that instead of replacing them? 6, what the total interest that was made at the 1% interest for the police station and the public works department? Was that a principal? Is it fixed or variable interest, and what was the total loss to the budget by doing that? 7, what were the failures within the public works department for fiscal year 22, and what was the total amount of loss? Ralph spoke on that last night and didn't really delve into it. I want to know about those failures because that's where we're gonna win. Number 8, what did the 20% increase in repairs consist of? So when he put up that graph and he said that 20%, that's the highest, and it was, I believe, off yes. And how could we, what did the framework of the 20% increase in repairs consist of? And how can we lower or eliminate this increase? And if so, how much money would we save? Number 9, are the lockers that for the police department a want or a need for that 60K? 10, could we use the funding for the lockers towards employment for another police officer instead? Since you're looking for like a detective, you could use that funding towards a detective and then take a large weight off your already spread thin police department. What could be possible consequences of not having new lockers? What would that look like to supply another job for a town rather than a material good? Around 13, what would that look like to our town to give officers a little more rest and a productive work schedule with that ability to be more flexible with your hours by having more staff? 14, how much overtime are we currently paying all employees in all departments, and how could that be restructured to save money? 15, I have some really good questions. Can I keep going?
This is the direction of the board, so it is your meeting and you have a governing board, so you, at the direction of your committee, can decide whether or not to extend time.
What's the will?
I care more than anyone in this town, sir. Thank you so much. I'll continue. So again, how can we restructure our overtime? Because that's just the biggest waste of money that you could think of, because once you work beyond that 40, 50 hours, you're no longer productive. So just go home. 15, how can we pay our lifeguards and pool employees more, David? This is a very important job, and I'm going to quote Dr. Emily Rosenthal pertaining to HB 3006. This is off the Oregon legislature.gov. She says, sadly, the tragic impact of drowning remains vastly under-recognized in our state, and Oregon is the unfortunate leader among the states that make up the West Coast. So drowning is the second leading cause of death for children 0 to 4. Fourth leading cause of death for 15 to 18-year-olds, and we live on a coastal town with water everywhere. Oregon children drown at a 26% higher rate than the national average. That's 72% more than California and 32% greater than Washington. For each fatal drowning, 2 more children suffer critical submersion injuries with often lifelong disabilities that greatly impair their development. Males are much more likely to drown than females across all age groups. We lack crucial data to allow us to understand the specific risks and factors to help address the epidemic. Children, the primary risk is getting to water that is unexpected. So the other day I took my kids to grandparents' house and I'm totally up helicopter mom. It's like, oh, you got that pool with the inch of water. Like, I'm literally not leaving until it's drained. Like, if you're not doing this in your community, there's a lot, there's a red flag to me. This is the highest cause of our deaths in our town, and we're literally like overworking our pool director and not letting her go to see her family on, like, can we just send her on a grant to Hawaii to like learn how to swim? Seriously, like, this is huge for our community. So like when you go to the pool, there needs to be a sign that says only children with bright swimsuits. We have to have appropriate fitting life-saving devices. So like before you even open that pool, you need to make sure that there's enough devices for children that don't know how to swim and that they fit properly. So like, I don't know if there's a grant for that or what she has done. She's got it figured out, but is there a grant available for our pool to secure swim lessons for all children in Coos County? If so, how much money would that grant be? And how much revenue would that bring for the pool department to be able to use for safety devices for children as well? So like lessons, the life jackets for the U.S. Coast Guard certified, like all of that. I could get that with a grant for our kids because that's like the most important thing that we could do here. And lifeguards more so that we're getting qualified candidates instead of, like having rigorous testing for like background check these lifeguards. That's the most important job in our town. Number 16, is there a way to lower the property tax rates so that people can put that savings into bettering their lives and growing our local economy simultaneously? As David mentioned yesterday, a lot of our community is 1 or 2 paychecks away from homelessness. For my family coming from Glasgow, it was about 7. I took all our 401k. I took every option that I could to tap out all our resources. We sold them all before we would go for any help, but being in our hometown was huge for that. We had, we had a GoFundMe. We had people bringing us meals. My husband was dying, and it was being in our hometown was crucial. So just add that. And it says, I remember you talking actually at the meeting. I didn't get to be there, but I watched it on YouTube, and you said, you're like, homelessness is going to affect all of us. Like, whether you want to think about it or not, it might not affect you or your child or your cousin or your mom, but maybe your friend's mom. And it's that 9th degree, like we're all connected. So it does affect us all personally. Usually with homelessness, there is some sort of crisis that causes or initiates losing a home, whether it's losing a job or getting from a job, or a family member passing, drug addiction, or a mental illness. So how do we take action? Because that's what I'm here for. I'm the action girl. A couple possible additions to drug and substance abuse is more education to our youth. Do we still have a DARE officer in our town? Or is that just like something that we did as kids that they don't have now?
We truly can't interact with you during.
Keep going.
Yeah.
18. Can we help the adults and teens and often children with our communities from getting exposed to from an uneducated viewpoint and are unnecessarily enslaved by addiction that could be prevented with education? 19, how many jobs would a sober center create? And are there grants available for securing this for our county? Medical inpatient services are an absolute necessity for the greater majority of individuals that choose to pursue a sober life and recovery. And this is all just this is my words. This is me and my experiences of my anthropology, everything that I've seen about this town. 20, how would that impact you personally to be able to send someone you love being torn apart to get help somewhere that is attainable to them? Securing either CCAT rides or police transport to a sober center is an option for those suffering, you know? Do we have funding for more police training, whether canine unit or specialized trainings on crucial topics such as Carly's Law? Carly's Law affected my family at the end of March. My children were pulled off oxygen at Berry Hospital. And when I reported to CPS what happened, we've been so criminalized that they didn't take any action. So I'm here to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else's children. So Carly's Law, if you don't know about it, Carly's Law, I'm taking this off of the Oregon Department of Justice website. Carly's Law is named after a 3-year-old Corvallis girl who died from abuse after allegations went unchecked. The law mandates that children in Oregon who exhibit suspicious physical injuries in the course of a child abuse investigation must receive medical attention within 48 hours. Since 2008, Carly's Law has helped thousands of Oregon children receive medical care and support related to suspected abuse. Carly's Law imposes specific requirements on law enforcement, Department of Human Services employees, and designated medical providers who have received specialized training to assess injuries that may have been caused by child abuse. So when so if you like go onto the website and look at all the bullets of Carly's Law, there is one that it just basically says that like it's also pertains to a vital organ. So a possible harm of a vital organ. So my 2 and 3-year-old have RSV. Their oxygen levels are at, you know, not a level to be admitted or to be, I'm sorry, trespass from the hospital. They tried to trespass my husband and I and keep our kids. We need more training in our town so these things aren't happening, please. I would love to see some grants secured for an amazing police force to better their broaden their knowledge. Thank you. And how much less crime would we see if we created resources and opportunities for those in need rather than oftentimes having non-accessible resources that leave them having crime as their weak solution? 21, what is our current calls per night in response to homelessness, and how would having a solution to the housing crisis change this and reallocate everything? Our time, the greatest gift here. 22, how much do we pay our public works employees hourly, and how could we offset some of the load with a consistent community volunteer program? 23, solar recurring monthly expenditure of power and the grant circle struggle. Just pop up solar panels on that shit. Put yourself a battery grid and just like be off grid in that circle and be cool. Hire more employees and pay less overtime with that money and have more well-rested and level-headed city officials. What will be the anticipated fiscal loss for not securing the 2 million grant funding? And is that a 1 million per year is the way I understood it for 2 years? We have till June 30th to do that. And did or did not Joe Benetti secede the group that was meeting to take care of that? How much loss would our town suffer by not providing help for the houseless and then continuing to have them on our streets, creating public safety issues such as outbreak of diseases known to have the highest rate of infection and intravenous drug users, crime, police dispatch, trash service via street sweepers, messes for local businesses that get dumpster drivers just turning our town into a trash hole, and calls from the public concerning houseless individuals that are not breaking the law. And therefore, by making contact, you're violating their 8th Amendment to the Constitution and wasting valuable police resources and making them into harassment officers, not peace officers like they want to be. Every action should be made with the thought of how will this transpire change, not just for our current generation, but for successive and successful generations to follow. Do you have any questions for me?
Not at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Appreciate that. Okay, is there any other public comments? Okay, hearing none, I think the next thing that we're going to do is, talk about the questions that the committee had. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Take it away. She has a question.
Yeah, I
Is
have
this
a
appropriate time for a question?
All right. Let me find the right place here. I noticed. That right now there is, under the general fund, there's. On page 39, there's reference, for the city attorney. And the message there is that. The general fund organization. Let's see. Unit referred to as city attorney. In previous budget documents has been moved to the unallocated section of the general fund. Please refer to that section for the current year budget. This is the final year that historical data will be presented for this organizational unit. There are no amounts budgeted for this department for fiscal year 23 or fiscal year 24. So it's my understanding that the city has 2 contracts, only 2 contracts, and everybody else is hired through the personnel department. 1 contract being for the city administrator, 1 contract being for the city attorney. And I'm curious as to what the justification is for not carrying forward a separate budget item for the city attorney. Being as it's important enough to be a separate contract, why are we not going to be able to see how much money to budget for that and to then be able to track the amount of money spent for one of those 2 very important contracts?
So I'll address that. First and foremost, the city does not have a contract with the city attorney. That is an appointment. And so he has a professional services engagement with the city administrator as CEO of the city. The council appoints, and so that is the city attorney for the institution. The bulk of those services are staff services. So that is a staff level position for the day-to-day, and also then is the city council's legal counsel. Because those are departmental charges, 2 years ago, it was determined under Oregon accounting law that it made better sense that that be incorporated into the general fund budget. And then we created the standalone budget for the council for training and other services. And then we allocate the cost because it's basically an unknown cost. The only additional cost that the council would authorize is litigation over and above. But it is the bulk of all costs to city attorney is staff level. It is a staff level position. And so
has it not always been? I agree with you. Yes, it's mostly staff. Every single meeting, our new contract, I'm sure, or not contract, our new ordinance. He drafted the ordinance for the homeless in response to 3115. I'm sure that came out of his office. However, we've done it this way for I don't know how long. And when I was elected, I learned that we had two contracts, one with yourself and one with the city attorney. And whether or not it's appointed, I saw the contract and there's your signature on it as representing us. So I think it's not an appointment in my understanding. That's more of a contract. And yes, you appoint attorney, but do you not issue, there was an RFP issued for that. And that's not a regular type of hire. We got responses to the RFQ. you got responses and we chose, and there were basically specifications for that. And so I think that, and I think it's justified to carry the same system that we've had for a long time with Mike Stebbins and whoever the attorney was before that. I think that just so that, because that's a fairly specific personnel staff position. And I think it should be its own thing, as we have our other departments have their own budget, so to speak. So I think that we should continue with the city attorney having his own budget, his or her own budget, and not dissolve into the general fund unallocated monies. I disagree with how that is being done. And I would ask everybody on the committee to think about that, because this is a big, big change from the way we've done it for a very long time. And it's worked very well to this point. I think it's going to be a lot harder to track how much money we are spending on attorney services, whether it's mostly staff or not. You can break that down through the billing. I'm sure that our finance director can figure out the staff stuff versus things like litigation and ordinance work or appeals or something, but I do not see the justification for changing. We've had it the way it's been for a very long time, has worked just fine. And something as important as something that's so important as to be under a separate personnel hire should not disappear under unallocated general fund.
I have a question.
Okay, that's what I'm going to say.
Is there, within the professional services breakdown, will there be a way for someone to drill down and see city attorney and other professional services? Was it all lumped in? I mean,
that detail can be provided, but there's not a way to drill down into that specific number in the budget line item. The account ID codes that you see, that is the budgeted level, that is the lowest level within the budgeting software that we budget to. So I guess that is the lowest. There's not more detail behind that. We have the ability within our accounting software, for instance, to look at what's included there, but.
And if I may, just to tack on to that, if you will, the governing body is provided a monthly check registry. So the entire public can go online and see one line item that sees how much the legal costs, because it's a one line item. The bill can sometimes be 10, 15 pages, because depending on the department. So when that comes in, our staff codes it to all of the various departments based on, was it a city council issue? Was it a planning and zoning land use? Was it administrative? Was it personnel? Was it a labor attorney? Was it an HR related? And so the bill itself is very detailed and broken down into departments. The city attorney is not a department. And so the city council also appoints an auditor, but you don't see a budget for the auditor. And so history is history, but it doesn't mean that it has always been appropriate governmental accounting standards board or following Oregon budget law. And so the previous finance director came to you and explained the whole purpose as to why it was being consolidated. And it was done in fiscal 22, which was, this is 2 budgets prior to this one. And so
I've only got one comment on this. I don't see how you could budget for this item, knowing what we go through with our council meetings, and seems like quite often we say, Mr. Wolf, what do you think here? And you know, the meter's running more on that topic than it is, you know, him just sitting there watching TV, so. As many times as we've done that, I'd hate to say what you'd have to throw as a number at, it'd be high. It'd be high, that's all I can say.
Well, and the question, did I hear that Oregon is directing us to put attorney monies into this unallocated expenditure?
So I'll let our CFO and CPA speak for governmental accounting standards as to the creation of a budget and an Oregon budget law. So and to answer you directly, no, the state is not telling us how to put our budget together. We put it in together in conformity with Oregon budget law. And so you have heard that for efficiencies, we have consolidated some things over years, but in this case, it is not a department. And so 2 years prior, the CFO came and had a conversation about what is a department and what is a fund within the budget. The city attorney is simply an appointment, but then it becomes administrative and operational at that point. You do not see the city administrator as a department. You do not see the auditor. And those are the three appointments. Contracts as city administrator fall to me. I'm the CEO of the city. So I execute contracts on a regular basis unless they are multi-year contracts, which then the council gives me authority to sign. They are approved as to form. Each year per the engagement, very much like with the auditor, those increase. We as staff estimate what our professional services are going to be for the year, whether that be grant writing, whether that be legal services, et cetera. There's nothing being hidden, as I say, because we're very transparent. Every month we go to the council with an entire check register of everything that's ever come out. And you can go in there and look at that particular one law group every single month, and you can see what's being spent at the city. And then from time to time, we get open records requests for copies of those legal bills. So it's almost impossible to know from one year or another, for instance, whether or not you're going to have a lawsuit, whether or not you have a land use over a pink building that's going to cost you an additional $26,000 that you never saw going, or you go into, say, arbitration or mediation or you have grievances. So we estimate based on historical, and that is based out of the software that does aggregate the cost across all departments. That's all.
So that, go ahead.
So what would be the best way if a council member or resident at the end of the year wanted to see what the total amount that was charged to the city attorney? What would be the best way to look at what those services were? Find that.
We could provide a detailed report of all the invoices paid to that attorney, and you'd see like a listing of how much was paid. You may not, without having the billing in front of you per se, you wouldn't know exactly for what the specific purpose was, but you could see that detail by, for the city attorney, and then have it by fund. So you would know which funds got charged, how much for that same attorney.
So the amount budgeted, is it 110,000?
Well, there's 350 in professional services.
350,000 in professional services.
If somebody has a question at the end of the year, say this is what was budgeted, what did we actually spend? Just because it's being allocated each month to a department, charged department, we're still going to be able to view that total amount of city attorney fees if somebody wanted to look at that.
Yeah, I'd say, for instance, we often will get requests from various companies that will ask for a year-end check run that aggregates. I myself have run it to see, for instance, who's our largest vendors? Where are we spending the bulk of our money? Are there alternatives to be able to spend local versus some of the others? So that's all management. The reality is other than this particular question, this is the first time that I've been North Bend that someone's like, well, I want to know exactly, what we're spending on legal costs on an annual basis. The only other request I can recall getting was from a counselor member wanting to know what litigation was costing the council on an issue, and a news inquiry on the recent Lamoda Luba challenge. Because again, it's all out there. You can go look at the check registry and add up 12 numbers and you know what the number is right away. And it actually shows you the fund that it comes out of.
Counselor Jones.
Would it be possible, or I think it's appropriate to change it from professional services to professional and legal? So that way somebody could find it if they were looking for it.
So
I have to
professional,
report my
good
taxes that
question,
way,
good
so.
question. There's a reason that's broke out that way. So you have legal, which is actually the city attorney. But then, for instance, we run several things potentially through the legal department. For instance, when we're in labor negotiations, we will run compensation studies. And so there are non-legal folks involved in that legal process, if you will. Those are professional services. Lawyer services are professional services, architecture, they.
I hear you. I'm
yeah.
just saying, I'm just out of, just in the spirit of transparency. And we're losing the ability to look up a particular thing that lots of people are interested in. And lots of people's taxes include, we have to break out legal or taxes and fee, those kind of things. I'm just curious if it would be possible. Then
It's
you
all
can see
always
it.
possible. The budget's going to reflect the majority of the committee
And it
and
isn't really
then
meant
the
to.
majority of the council.
It isn't really meant to get down to
You
a
know.
fine line of what did we pay. It's the
Exactly.
budget at the top level, understood, but.
And so budgeting is by the department level. And so, for instance, departments have spending authority within their department. But can you look at, say, the fire department and find out how much they're actually spending at Staples? No. But if you go to the check registry, absolutely.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm saying is that spending authority under our budget, under our form of government, and under Oregon law is at the department budget level.
One more.
Okay, so. I've been looking through the check register and it does have a ledger for city attorney and it jumps from like 4,000 a month up to 11,000. Will that line item still be there and will there be like a year-end total on just on city attorney fees, the billing?
So the check registry will not change. So every single month, every single check that goes out from this city, every penny that is spent goes through the city council. You adopt it, it's under the consent, and it's published online as part of the council packet. That will always be there. And so the number aside is so that it is written out of and paid for out of a fund and then allocated behind the scenes, no different than, say, our gas cards. We don't have 50 different gas accounts, if you will. We have one and it comes out. So where you see like fuel in all these different departments, one account comes in and gets allocated. That is fund accounting, and it's proper fund accounting. And so that's what you have. Your auditor has reviewed all of these budgets and has not said, hey, you're doing this wrong. What they have asked us to do is consolidate things and have given us advice to do so. We're simply just being reflective to making sure that we're in full conformity with GASB, GAAP, General Accepted Accounting Principles, and Oregon budget law. And so, and that's what this gentleman, gets dinged on the in the audit. So he eats and breathes it.
Okay, so my understanding is that it's being moved because it is hard to budget for legal costs. And because they jump all over the map depending on what's happening, so it's kind of easier to budget for it if it comes out of the unallocated pool? Is that a good understanding of how we should understand why this change is being made?
Yes, and then we allocate it to the various departments when the bill comes in. We don't know. We do honestly not know, for instance. And we're glad to, if you come to my office someday, I'll pull out the bill and you'll actually see all the codings.
Okay.
So what we do, and so I'll use the legal as an example. I mentioned that the bill can be multiple pages, okay? Every engagement, we have set up accounting with them. So if they are doing something for the library, for instance, it gets billed to a code. So when it comes in, we know who then to bill it back to. Rose in accounting knows that I then, every month, I read through and I'm like, whoa, this one should not have been billed here. It needs to be billed there. Because any bill over X dollars has to come past my desk and I have to sign off on it.
Okay, all right. Thank you for
So-
everybody's time for explaining this, because it kind of opened a new light, put everything in a new light, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Now we're all smarter. We're all more educated, that's for sure. So.
Hey, this isn't checkbook, right? Like that, like, is smart as I think I am, which gets me in trouble all the time.
There is a very robust fund accounting.
There's, it's not a household budget. We can't say, oh, we really need to fix
Yeah.
this. Like
Yeah.
that, there, there are about 10 different layers of regulation so that the public's interest is honored at all steps of the way. And anyway, thank you.
For us all, for
Appreciate it.
sure.
Yeah. And that's, and you said the critical word, transparency.
Yes.
That's the auditors, the misnomer, and I always try to push this out. An auditor is not here to catch fraud. That's a forensic audit. The
Mhm.
auditor is to make sure that we're following general accepted accounting principles, governmental accounting standards, Oregon budget law, that we have the internal controls that we're supposed to. They then pull all of these different, like for instance, they may pull a legal bill and they're seeing, are you doing what you're supposed to do? And then you get the audit report, because the auditor, although it's a staff level, the auditor comes back and says, folks, I want to go over this and I want to go over these pages here. And then staff has to respond back to those and make sure that if there are any material weaknesses, any deficiencies, any questions, that we address it, because you don't want to move that in future. And so that's what Jessica Terra started with you all when she came as a very qualified finance director. Now you have Jeff. The difference now is you actually have a CPA. So when you all hire an auditor, we have an auditor in our CFO right here. And so it's interesting watching their conversations sometimes, because not all auditors think alike. But for transparency, then all those purchases, go to the council. You either have approved them in specific contracts or specific grants, or you have approved them as a course of the action. And then the check registry is the ultimate, for instance, I'll be the first to say, we solved this, but we went to Seaside for training. You were there, all right? I went to check in, my city credit card got declined. Well, actually, I think it charged $6 and then said decline. Okay. No, that's not the issue. The issue is that we have a maximum control. And so if another department had spent, higher that month, and so I whipped out my personal card and said, just put it. So you will see on the next check registry a line item, David Miller, just like you'll see for the mayor and you, because you have expenses. You're a line item. If you go upstairs and you pull out the filing cabinet and you look up, well, actually you would have staff. But if I went to finance and said, let me see the David Miller file or the Susanna Norda, we are a file, because if that check register and that expenditure doesn't match up to the paperwork and the auditor looks at it, then there's problems, and we don't want problems. And so I only say that and give that as an example, as a long drawn out answer is like, this is a well-oiled machine and it's only getting better.
All
So,
right, well,
It's handled with different jurisdictions as to.
Oh, very much so.
General fund, unallocated.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, very much so.
all right, well,
Thank you.
that was a great first question. Wasn't on the thing, but we're gonna move on to that fiscal year 24 proposed budget question and answers.
We only have one more thing.
Go for
From
it.
an auditor standpoint, they look at those legal invoices. They like to look at them to see like how much we're spending because they're looking to see if there are unrecorded liabilities that we might need to reflect in our financial statements relating to lawsuits. And so it's a common practice, standard operating procedure that they're going to scrutinize legal expenses. And they do ask for the details of those in a lot of cases.
Right.
well, you can actually go one more step. The lawyers actually,
Yes.
our city attorney actually has to file a letter signed affidavit and disclose any potential financial litigation that might affect the finance of the city. And then they have to sign it as part of the audit process. There is so much scrutiny, and yeah, thank you, because I totally forgot about that audit process where they actually get every single legal bill and have to scrutinize it, and they do read everyone. They also read all of your minutes.
They do.
Yes,
The auditors do.
yes,
They do.
Wow.
yes.
Can you please move your microphone up because I can hear you, but I don't know if the public can hear you.
Sure.
Thank you.
South Dakota could hear me. They just chimed in.
Okay, well, so we do have a presentation tonight. Several questions were posed after last night's meeting and presentation, and so we've had a chance to compile those questions and address them. And so we're going to go through each of those questions here tonight for you. So the first question. How are all staff supported during record 9% inflation of 22 and 23? And our response is that city staff operate under a variety of collective bargaining agreements. Police, fire, and streets each have their own collective bargaining agreement with the city. And those agreements are in place for 3-year increments. And one of them is renewing each year. Collective bargaining agreements contain agreed upon cost of living increases in addition to many other types of incentives. Non-representative employees, meaning those not covered by a collective bargaining agreement, are also considered for cost of living adjustments by the city administrator. Compensation studies also are performed to ensure that city employees are maintained at a median of peer cities and that are similar to the city of North Bend. Those studies include an analysis of salaries and benefits so that total compensation may be viewed and considered.
Any questions? To make sure you understood that.
That's my question. I understand the CBA, but we can't like spend any ARPA money. We can't spend any one-time money on a national calamity that we've never anticipated. We didn't budget for. I mean, yeah, I understand that we're on a 3-year CBA cycle. I get that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the response is there's no response. Is that correct?
Not actually. So when you say, could we spend ARPA money on employees? We have. The council did.
Okay.
It's in the budgeted ARPA. So if you go to the budget, you'll actually see a whole line item, which was staff directed, and it was done by the city council as part of their adopted ARPA plan.
Sure. There could be additional benefits or lots of creative solutions, I'm sure.
Yeah, but they also wanted to make sure as a governing body that they didn't take recurring because it was limited non-recurring money. But yes, they actually provided a benefit to every single employee that was here throughout COVID.
Yeah, and my question kind of speaks to the public-private side for residents, right? Like when times are good, I'm doing good, and government workers, they get paid the same way. But I mean, I don't think there's been a recession of this magnitude. Even the Great Recession, I don't think was this magnitude, or it was similar. And I'm guessing that the city made allowances, whatever it was, 14 years ago. So anyway, it'd be nice if that could be in the budget message, right? Like, not that we gave away free stuff, but like, hey, this is how we took care of our staff during a time that, we've never seen before. Well, at least in 40 years. To me, that's a rich area.
So that was reflected twice. It was reflected in the annual budget on the year that we did it. And it was also reflected when we actually went to the council to get approval to actually do it. So I think that we covered both of those. The other thing is that our represented employees are all paid at or above market.
Yeah, that was, I mean.
Is that not a fair statement?
Being negative, I'm looking for an opportunity, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so the reality is that as razor thin, I'd love more opportunities. But it's the unrepresentative that we're trying to get up to the 50th percentile,
Sure.
because those are the ones contractually, from a union standpoint, contract versus non-contractor, two different things. We're in a unique situation. If you go over to Coos Bay, almost 100% of their employees are union. Half here are. And so it's
Yeah,
a
I don't think
delicate
it matters.
balance.
We're still going to risk losing people if we don't
So-
pay them. So,
But we're not losing folks.
yeah.
Folks actually are here. They're staying. They're very happy. We know this because we do an annual engagement survey. And the council actually, through 360 reviews, actually gets feedback on the management here from their administration.
Sweet.
So good points. And not everybody sees all of that. So, thanks, Jeff.
Next question is, why not make the public safety fund accurate? Why transfer instead of showing real expenses? This here.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
The Public Safety Fund was established for the express purpose of segregating public safety operations and making them easily identifiable and transparent. Public safety expenditures are reflected in the Public Safety Fund, Fund 09, on pages 52 through 55 of the budget, and include detailed budgets for the police and fire operations. Police expenditures are identified by accounts with an 0913, and fire expenditures are identified with accounts starting with an 0914. These expenditures largely are paid for by a transfer from the general fund 01. There are other resources that help pay for public safety, such as grants, public safety fees, and those sorts of things. But it is really a transfer from the general fund that is funding that list of detailed expenditures that are on the budget on those pages noted.
So it seems like so it seems like there might be some confusion about what you see when you see a line item that says transfer. I'm going to guess, because when we transfer in, maybe that's what they're asking. I don't know who asked this question, but I think it's understanding the lists that are here, because it's not, transfer is not an expense. Transfer is moving money back and forth. It's not an expense.
Correct. We are moving money from one fund to another. And in reality, Fund 09 really is part of the general fund. So in this case, we're really just moving money within the general fund for public safety. We have ours segregated. Not all governments do. Some have them. I think even we historically have had police and fire as departments within the general fund. But the purpose of Fund 09 really is to segregate the public safety operations specifically because of how important they are.
Also, I think one way to look at it is if you look at a checking and savings account, for instance. Okay, so let's say that the public safety fee comes into the savings account, and then you have your checking account. And so you have the expenses and you have to write checks. Well, you don't have overdraft protection here. What you have is you go to the savings account, which is the public safety fee, and you transfer in money to your checking account so that you have enough. As we had said yesterday, we actually operated a very large deficit of taxes do not pay enough or generate enough to fund all public safety. So it is, and so each year that transfer gets larger. That's just the reality.
Okay.
Public safety, page 52, how do we determine how many officers are needed? For this question, I'm going to ask Cal Mitz, our police chief, to describe what goes into evaluating how many officers are needed. One item to note that budgetary constraints are obviously one factor.
Probably not gonna like this answer because we need more.
First off, it's a good question. It's one that I think probably historically has been challenging city councils, city governments, state governments, probably since the beginning of time. It's a really complicated, I guess, there are several different approaches that governments use, and some of their advisors have advised governments to use. These approaches can be based on per capita. They're throughout my 30 years, or I've seen a lot of different comparisons amongst cities. For example, when I first got hired at Coos Bay, there were 1.8 guaranteed by a city charter before that city charter was ruled unconstitutional. So we lost that 1.8 and went back closer to 1 per thousand. So that is one approach to look at it. And I don't think that that's necessarily the right approach. And I think because there are so many other things that need to be considered to besides just population. So crime trends, minimum staffing levels, authorized budgets, and workload based approaches are the different ways in which we can look at that. So if we look at some of those things that are combined in the workload, as well as crime trends, just for the month of April, for example, we had 1,605 calls for service for the police department. If you were to break that down, that comes out to about like an average of 53 calls per day. The problem with this is that it seems like maybe that's not such a high number, but a lot of these calls, they might only be 15 minutes before they're resolved or completed. Then we have calls that can go on for hours before they're completed. And the complexity of the call is really is what drives that number. In 2017, North Bend PD had 21 officers. Now, I don't know if this was about the time the water tax, but that's what the number was. Today, we have 16. 2 of those are actually in training. So the numbers where we're at right now, I would describe them as it's a skeleton crew. This is as far as you would want to bring it down. At any given time, scheduled, you have 3 patrol officers, one of which is a sergeant, 2 patrol officers for a city the size of 10,000 people and however many square miles the city of North Bend represents. Because of our CBAs, you are looking at each one of those officers could have, and it's pretty accurate to say that there's over 200 hours of vacation time, holidays that are accrued each year. And so that adds up to days, if not weeks for sure, closer to a month or more of vacation and off time, which is necessary. But that's just one. And then you've got the 2 other people on that have that too. So it's basically the way we describe it is if you have 3 people assigned, you're basically guaranteed to have 2 on. So that's where it really comes down to. And then when you throw in sick time with that, that brings your staffing level down quite a bit. And where we're at right now, and it's something it's not unique to North Bend. This is an issue that's across the state throughout the cities is, this staffing level that we're at right now, which we, a lot of the city council is aware of, of what is restricting us, but, it prevents us from having things like a narcotics detective. And it prevents us from having staffing levels that are high enough to where we're doing a lot more proactive rather than responsive or reactive type patrolling. So that's that's kind of how we are, where we are right now and what drives it. So. hopefully
So that was
answered
my
the
question.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say, I didn't understand, how you decide and what are the constraints? And it sounds to me like we don't have enough people.
Okay.
Is that correct? Is that a?
The answer
I have
is
to
yes.
be- yes.
The answer is yes.
Yes. Adopting, yes, from the citizens.
Yes, and so I've been looking at the population and the population zoomed up from 2016 to 2020, it's like zoom. Where's the taxes? Where did that money go? Because all of those people had to buy homes or they're paying rent or they're doing something. So did we just shortchange the police department or?
That is a resounding no. So the population of the city actually had stayed pretty plateau for a long time.
Right,
It has only been the last couple years that we finally broke 10,000. We were hovering in the high 9,000 range. We're now about 10,609, I believe, as of today. We'll be at 610 when Steph, actually, she's outside the city, so never mind. And so if you look at housing, we actually don't have a huge amount of houses that have been built. In fact, we've had no real large housing developments. We have folks living in houses, renting out rooms. We have Airbnbs that exist. We have folks living in RVs on their properties, things of that nature. We have a huge housing shortage. We're 2.2 square miles and we have very, very little buildable space. And so the city just engaged and went through the whole housing needs assessment analysis process. And then we'll be going through the housing implementation. The key to all that is you can add an additional 500, 1,000, 2,000 people, and that is not what affects the tax rate or the tax revenue to the city. What increases that is folks getting permits when they remodel their properties, building new properties to reset the value, or doing a substantial renovation that triggers a reassessment of the property. Barring that, Proposition 5 and 50, which you'll hear later in the presentation, limits any increment to 3% in most cases. And so, for instance, I believe it was last year, the average increment on the police department was, I believe, 7.6%, but we were held at a 3% increment on property tax. And so costs have outweighed expense. We have a charter provision because of a lawsuit that occurred and was rendered in May of 2020. I came here in October of 2020 and inherited that deck of cards. We cannot increase any fee higher than the Social Security index without voter approval. The only fee that's been increased over and above the 3% increment has been the pool levy. It's the only levy in the county since I got here that has been approved by voters. And so, as I said yesterday, I would love to be able to fund a detective or a narcotics officer for the police department and additional staff, but at what expense? You have 5 folks that are in administration that actually wear multiple hats, not only of the city, but we also do the urban renewal and all of the other enterprise funds. And then you have 3 workers in parks, and then you have public safety, and that's what your general fund is. And so we'd like to try to educate and get that message out more and more, because you're absolutely right. Unless the public wants to increase the public safety fee. We continue to cut. We look at efficiencies. We look at aggressively going after grants in order to make ends meet. And that is the direct goals and priorities of our governing body to continue to do that. And so we look at how to live within our means while actually trying to provide the best level services. We'll be the first to say we can't get to everything. And we don't get it in the same timetable. I get requests via email. It's like, I sent you this today, last week. Why haven't you gotten to it? There's 3 people in that department. I have to make, and the departments have to make management decisions within the resources. And that's the same thing with the police department. And so that's why we've aggressively gone after some of these grants, and we've aggressively used our ARPA money in order to make sure that the departments have the equipment and the resources that they need to do their jobs. So you got a yes and you got a no.
Okay.
Counselor Goff?
Mr. Chairman, I've got a little bit of family situation, so I'm gonna excuse myself.
Okay, no problem at all. Thank you.
Yep. I'll hit on.
Chief, before you go,
Okay.
I'd just like to say thank you. Can we all make some noise for our public safety department?
Gosh, yeah.
Totally.
I don't think he's going too far.
Police public safety overtime at 150,000. Is this part of patrol and can we hire another person? Fire by CBA pays overtime. The response is a certain amount of overtime is anticipated because of scheduling. Public safety personnel operate on a 365-day, 24-hour per day schedule. And there are many factors that affect scheduling that create circumstances that overtime hours are necessary. Court appearances, vacations, and sick leave, as well as caseloads, all may result in the use of overtime. It is unlikely that overtime could be avoided with the addition of another FTE. The associated, just for some perspective, the costs associated with adding an FTE are significant. The budgeted average personnel cost of one police sergeant is $170,500. The budgeted average personnel cost of one patrol officer is $147,700. Additional FTE would also include adding materials and services costs for equipment and training. So, Cal, do you want to talk about the scheduling and overtime just a little bit? Because I think that's one of the main things that.
So one of the things, just probably the biggest examples is there's no way to really predict when we're going to get subpoenaed into court. And those court subpoenas, the courts do not look at our schedule and say, let's make sure he's on duty. And then if it's on if I work night shifts, for example, I'm never going to be in a non-overtime situation. So you got that. You also, a lot of the things that you just never can tell when a call is going to come in. And if it comes in, 15 minutes before the end of shift, and it's just like anybody else's problems that they have in other industries. You never know when a part's going to break down or something like that. So I think the best way to describe this is that the target is so big, you can't just hit it with one thing or cover the whole target with one dart. And that's really what you would be doing by, we could attack certain things. We could attack like this narcotics problem, like we were talking about with a narcotics detective, but it isn't going to lower pretty much the bottom line of your overtime.
It's probably especially exacerbated because we're not flush with officers per shift anyway.
Correct.
You could take out the whole force with just one call.
And right, and also, yeah, if you have to bring somebody in, like in a big situation, that's gonna be automatic overtime for them. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
And then Jeff, if you will, remind the committee, last year versus this year, our total tax increment with general fund with the property tax in relation to the 2 figures you see there for adding one of those positions.
110 or
It was
something.
140,000 as a tax increment.
Right.
That's how
Increase
much
in
we
property
got,
tax.
the city got more in property taxes. So that was our increment. imagine this is only one
Yeah.
budget
Yeah,
piece.
that's one item.
That's one item.
Yeah,
Doesn't even cover it.
right. Okay,
CROs in police, CSLFRF, Public Works, and now fire, how do they interact and share information and resources? I want to be clear on this one. There is only one FTE dedicated to the CRO position. For the fiscal year 24 budget, this position is funded 100% by the CSLFRF fund or the ARPA dollars. For future budgets, this position will likely need to be allocated across several funds because the CSLFRF grant will be fully expended, and there is not an expectation that any future funds will be received under this grant. The percent allocated would depend on an estimate of the amount of time being given to the various tasks and duties of the departments for which that allocation would, or that position would be performing duties.
So this goes back to a previous comment of, you've got these funds, is there something that can be done? We knew that we needed this position, but we knew at the time, starting up, we couldn't fund it with the existing budget. But we also knew that we had a lot of economic development in play that within the next couple of years actually may have an increment. For instance, I'd mentioned a couple of those projects yesterday at a very high level that are coming, that the governing body is well aware of, that we believe will bring in additional tax base. And so we also had negotiated a new contract, for instance, for one of the tribes properties that bring in specific revenue. And so what you have here is this position is not being eliminated. The position is safe, but in order to take any pressure off different areas of the budget, why we worked on tax increments and looking across budgets for savings is how to extend out before it actually has to be paid for by the general fund. And so that's where this position is headed. But there's no, I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that we're cutting or reducing police services. We actually have added police services with decreasing the public safety budget, if that makes sense. And folks are like, what do you mean you cut the budget? Well, yes. In fact, I mean, that's why we have lower maintenance on those vehicles than we used to with all the Chargers, for instance. There's lots of ways that you find savings and you run your government more efficiently. For instance, all the standardized uniforms, instead of having all these different uniforms types that we used to have. There's a lot of different things that collectively the department has done to make sure that we are being good stewards of the taxpayer money. They also got rid of mandatory overtime with the shift changes
That saved a bunch.
Exactly. And so there's lots of things that the command staff has done to move the city forward and still live within the means.
I'm wondering if you could, on top of answering this particular question this way, explain a little bit about how when you're budgeting and you split across. So somebody noticed that CRO appeared a lot. So the community resource appeared in many places, but that didn't mean that it was one in each. So if you could explain a little bit about how those positions get divided across funds.
Yeah, so I think when you're dividing a position across funds, you want to key in on the tasks and duties that they're performing and the amount of time or estimate of time that they're going to be spending on those particular functions. And then that is how you come up with your allocation.
In the budget.
You are doing an estimate of where you think they're going to be spending their time in any given next fiscal year. And that's how those allocations come up with. And we do that for a lot of positions. There's an FTE chart in the back where you can see
Administrator.
kind of the administrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in 7 different funds. If you go to page 108, you'll see that matrix. And so one of the things that we're working on currently, it's within administration, is you'll see, for instance, IT network administrator. And so we are working on a ticketing system so that we can absolutely make sure we know what percentages we should be allocating IT to. It's been a guessing game. And so we didn't have a ticketing system. And so therefore it was just sitting down and he's estimating. And so you see that these are reviewed on a regular basis based on where the workload is accomplished. And then behind that, then the next page, you actually, it was asked about salaries, for instance. You'll see the unrepresented city staff. And then on page 109 and then on 110 is the pay scales for the public safety, streets, and volunteers. Those are represented employees. What you do not see in there are the other pluses in the CBAs. For instance, longevity pay or education or certificates. So this is just the base salary. And then on page 111, you'll see the interfund transfers so that you see that all those transfers of moving money back and forth to various funds, that you actually see those. So, but good reference material for you there.
Thank you.
Good question too.
It's a good question.
Fire on page 55, there's a increase in fire prevention question, and the response is increase in the fire prevention line item on page 55 is solely attributable to the city receiving a grant for $250,000 for the purpose of wildfire prevention. Expenditures for this grant are budgeted as fire prevention. That's
Awesome.
the reason for the increase, and it is notable how much that
Drastic.
one particular line item jumped.
Yes.
We are receiving a lot of grant money the past few years. Is this COVID money, or can we expect to see grant funds higher than in the past? The city of North Bend received $2,169,618 under the American Rescue Plan Act, and that's COVID-related funds. These funds certainly have been significant for the city and for many governments throughout Oregon. We do not expect to receive any additional funding for this grant. Notwithstanding, the city of North Bend's staff diligently have been engaged or are engaged in the process of applying for many new and different grants. New grants in this budget include the COPS federal grant in public safety for $125,000, the wildfire prevention grant in public safety for $250,000, a firefighting capacity grant in public safety for $366,000, an EPA grant in the stormwater and wastewater fund of $1,378,000. In addition, there are several other grants that are not included in this budget because we don't know the answer yet to whether or not we'll be funded for them. But to the extent of it is likely that we're funded for a grant, that's when the point in time that we go ahead and make the decision to include it in the budget. If it's unknown as of the point in time when we're developing the budget, you know, conservatively, we'll leave it out for that purpose. But we do believe, and management expects grants to be an important and significant part of the city's budgets for fiscal year 24 and for coming years going out.
So if you would get a grant, 250,000, what happens if you don't spend it?
Good question. So in some cases, if you do not spend the grant during what is called the grant period, you have to return the money.
No.
A lot of grant contracts that are called for that.
We don't return money.
Yeah, we don't want it. You don't want to do that.
Well, wildfire prevention, I don't know how many wildfires we're gonna have this year, but.
Okay, so all right, so great. It's an opportunity to let you know that the fire chief is here. He's going to explain what that 250,000 is and what we're going to be able to do with it for the next 3 years.
Okay.
Look on his face.
I know.
And
Bad, I like.
Put him on the spot.
no, this one's actually pretty easy. We're evaluating our areas. We've had the majority of wildland fires. People don't realize what a wildland fire is. We've had
homeless folks get mad at each other and actually catch their homes on fire. So we've had multiple fires at one time. And it seems like most of our wildland fires have been located in a couple of different areas. One down around the Pittem Loop area by the bridge. And it's quite some long hose lays that we have to go in there to put some stuff out. I can think off, I looked a little bit and we had in excess of 10 fires down there last summer. And if we don't get on those in a hurry, they're going to be real big. So, and the other area that we're looking at is behind Big Lots. That's another major area. Another one's across from Kenware Chevrolet. And these are kind of areas that some are private, some are public, but we're able to, that's where most of our wildland issues are. So what we're going to be able to do is go in there and clear out the underbrush, clear out what actually burns, and use those funds to be able to actually eliminate well, not possibility, but the major possibilities of fire in there and having them grow to be larger and larger. So we hope that some areas that are private, if we start getting these fires in here, we're able to document it. We encourage the people, we send them letters. You need to go ahead and eliminate the underbrush, take care of this. And if they don't take care of it, then we use these funds to go in there and take care of it and then bill them for it so that we eliminate those wildland issues. So over the 3 years, we have this $250,000 to spend. Our hope is also, we're going to do an initial clean, which is going to be a really, really good clean. We'll look at the Pittem Loop area potentially. Between the path and the road, we clean that down so there's those big trees in there. Almost make it look like a park in there again. Be kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then we're able to actually go in, purchase a machine we're looking at to be able to maintain it that way for years to come. Our Parks Department did a terrific job back behind the tennis courts back over at McPherson. Great job in there. But it's a challenge, exactly, but it's a challenge back behind it to be able to maintain that. So hopefully we're going to be able to buy a piece of equipment so we can continue and maintain it. And then we're really going to be able to get ahead of the whole thing.
That's terrific.
So is your employees doing that work, or do you have to hire people to do that work?
This won't be our people doing it. No. No, it'll be outside people doing, we're not experts in that. But we are experts on where the fires are and how to eliminate the fire loads in those areas. And so we're very excited about this.
Sounds like a lot of money, but it's not.
No, it goes in a hurry. You know, if you're looking at over $100,000 just for a piece of equipment to be able to maintain it, there's almost half right there. I mean, not quite. My math's a little better than that, but.
Counselor Norton?
That area that was occupied by the tennis court at McPherson, that now is coming back pretty strongly overall in Blackberry. So is there, I mean, is it just gonna be mowing the Blackberry or?
That's going to be part of our plan is we're doing some serious evaluations on how to take care of that best. And we're going to do the very best we can to be able to maintain it as well as we can to get rid of, because we know how it was before in there. There was a lot of fire hazard in there, 8 or 10 feet tall brush.
It was pretty awful.
Yeah, and so it was knocked down. And so that's our goal is to be able to get this equipment to be able to maintain it, keep it down. And we do have experts within the city. Our Parks Department has good knowledge on how to take care of this. And hopefully this is another tool for their toolbox to be able for them to really be aggressive with it and keep this stuff down so that we eliminate a lot of that.
I'm just kind of, I guess, my thought would be maybe a different approach, restoring the regular indigenous undergrowth, your salal, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Or is the trees growing?
Right. And that's the thing is we're starting into this right now. So the nice thing is we have a lot of options on really how to deal with this. So that's exciting. We do have a lot of options for it.
Yeah. Goats.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
It's
question, please.
I was just it's another terrific example of how all of our staff work together and think out of the box and do not ever really seem to say, that's not my job.
Right.
In ways that we kind of are accustomed to,
Well, as an example, just for this, just looking at equipment to get to clean this. We talk with the public works director. We talk with people on the crews that use heavy equipment more. We talk with the Parks Department on their ideas. And so we all do work together really well. And it's really a great atmosphere to have. He had a question back behind you
I
first.
understand.
He had a question back behind you first.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, so on this topic, on this grant topic, not specific to public safety, but it seems like, you know, we're getting ripped off by the state, right? Like we have to provide services because, you know, we're on the US highway, because of our location. You know, I think about us comparing to like, you know, maybe Monmouth Independence, right? And they don't have the same kind of problems we have, you know, on a little sort of road like that. So anyway, I'm curious to know, maybe like future council, is it worth professional services for like a full-time grant searching person or a staff person who does, it seems like the city, the state should be supporting us differently than, you know, cities that aren't, you know, on 101. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is that like a future budget thing, or maybe just like ask the council if I want to go talk to the council?
So as I said to the mayor recently, it takes 3 hours to drive to Salem and 6 months for him to get back to us, if you're lucky.
Oh, yeah, and we don't want to say like I having our existing staff do it. I'm saying, is there a profit in investing in a person or a professional service for these kinds of funds?
So the council actually has and most recently, even the Urban Renewal Agency. So the council budget, the current one, and then the one before you has professional services dollars earmarked for grant writing and grant writers. And so depending on what opportunity we're going after, depends on whether or not we go out to someone who is a grant writer that has expertise in a specific area versus for instance, the Urban Renewal Agency engaged with a lobby group under professional services to help us secure $4 million towards an appropriation bill for the annex project. And so we hope to hear about that funding. But at this point, All Stars with our congressional delegation has aligned. And I will tell you from the onset, I was encouraged to aim low. And well, staff knows I sort of say hell no. And so I went to the URA and they said, well, what do you think the likelihood of being able to get 4 million? And I said, great, because we did great research on the company. And we did our due diligence. And so we put them up on a pedestal and said, we feel pretty comfortable, you go be our lobbyist, and it has paid off. So collectively, the staff and the Urban Renewal Board and the City Council work in tandem to achieve the council goals. And in this case, the annex was one of the goals. And we knew that we didn't have the staff wherewithal to dog it in Washington nonstop, especially when we knew that a potential recession was on the forefront, and that inflation was going, and that the earmarks, we were told, you know, expect little to nothing. And so it pays off. So we do make those decisions collaboratively, and sometimes they pay off, sometimes they don't. But so far, from a collective standpoint, we have a very great batting average. You know, I'm under secrecy, but I happen to know that this figure, by the time the budget gets before the council, it's going to change. But I'm not at liberty to say anything right now because I'm not allowed to. But
Well, yeah, revenue came out today, so things are looking
you know,
pretty good. Yeah.
the message here is like staff is going after this, and we'll continue to go after this, and we're going to continue to apply. I know oh, he's over there. Never mind. Yes, you're over there. So the fire department, for instance, is waiting with bated breath on, I think, $366,000 grant for scuba gear, so they can go scuba diving. It's really the air tanks. It's called scuba, but it's really the air tanks. And so they've got that in play. There's grant money for the pool that is specifically for swimming and swim lessons, and we're working collaboratively with the school district on a joint application in advanced health, so we'll further that. The library has technical assistance a grant writer through CCD Business, who is working with them. There you go. She got a grant to write grants. And so they're working to pull in money on the library. And so collectively, yeah, this is not a city that traditionally had gone after its fair share. And it's like clawing all the time because we're down here on the coast and sometimes often forgotten. But you have a mayor that's on the board with the League of Oregon Cities. She's been very active with the Oregon Mayors Association. She has gone to Washington. She's been, in our congressional offices. She's been to the state house. And so it's a collective effort to continue. They know where North Bend is. They know about North Bend. And collaboratively, I'll tell you that, the governor's office is coming and we'll be meeting with them shortly. So it's not unheard of for what we're working as a team here to accomplish for the taxpayers.
And can I add to that too? Because I think Anthony made a good point about there are different challenges that we have, being, right off of the state highway or down here on the coast. So the Oregon Mayors Association, one of the past presidents asked me if I would join a steering committee to look at putting together a coastal caucus of Oregon mayors to talk about, try to lobby for the different things that affect us on the coast and the rural area. So in the League of Oregon Cities meeting in June, we're going to be sitting down and looking and talking about what that would look like to put together a coastal caucus for those unique things that are happening to our cities.
Councilor Judge, you had one question.
Okay, so my question is really about, we could silo and have a grant writer, but what we're doing in the city, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're making this a collaborative effort. Everybody is working on their writing skills. Everybody is working on their seeking skills. We work together. And when this group decides maybe we need some outside help, they decide that. So is it a collaborative effort for both writing and everything that well suits all the ways to get grants?
So here's the easier way to do it. If you're a department head and you're here now, raise your hand if you've had a hand in writing anything on grant or grant administration.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. That's how you get grants done. You don't hire somebody to figure it all out. Everybody learns a piece and everyone writes, and then maybe you find somebody to put the application together.
Yeah,
Well,
even our city
that's new.
planner,
That's
even our
new
city
to the city.
planner. I mean, it keeps
Certain
going
grants-
down.
there's certain grants that have to be written specifically, the verbiage has to be
So-
exactly the right way, and that's when you ask for outside help.
Mhm, mhm.
So, Councilor Nora.
I had inquired because there's some brush at the south end of the Simpson Bluff Trail, some big tree limbs, I guess the tree came down. And I said, what's the plan? Because it's drying out and it's gonna be a fire hazard. And I learned that Mr. Milliron told me that he inquired with Paul Thompson and that they are going to get to it. And I said, do we have a chipper? And I learned that the street department has it's a pretty small chipper, I guess. It's not a big chipper, but we're going after a grant, if I remember it right. We're going after a grant for a big chipper that can handle big limbs.
Yeah.
Which is perfect because then you can, put them down here and there and you kind of getting rid of it and it's not a fire hazard and you're making use of it. So that kind of thing is what I learned when I asked the question.
Sure, yeah, and my point was not how we budget for it, we budget in lots of departments for professional services, groovy. But it just seems like moving forward, we're going to have to prioritize that. Because I don't think we have a number, like, is there any estimate of how many, residents that are not tax paying that are, sleeping in RVs on somebody's property? I mean, I think because of our location, we have a really unique set of challenges that everybody else should help pay for, right? So
Because they're here.
that's all I'm saying, right? Like the
Yes.
port, when people fly into Portland and then they're going to end up here because they go to Dunes Fest or something, we're not getting a piece of the port money, but they're coming here. And I understand that this is a big tax thing. But for me, the residents there's so many others using our services as opposed to the residents that's a real difference. And maybe this, you know, the coastal league that you talked about, because it's not unique to us, you know, it's kind of all these tourism places, right? So that's exciting. And I just hope we can figure out some way to tease this out in the budget so that we can evaluate it and, you know, fund it properly if it continues to pay off, you know?
Tried the gas tax, that failed.
Yeah.
So, I'll, before we go on to the next question, so one of the challenges that we do is the cities go to it's called the Wednesday Business Connection at the Chamber.
Yeah.
And each city gives a budget presentation. Those budget presentations, I like to tell folks you know, it's like, are you smart as a fifth grader? Don't ask me to take some of their tests because that's long gone. But we try to use as many graphs, charts, things. That's that time that we've gotten past the budget. We're using the new technology, but I think that the budget book will actually get better and better every year. I'm very confident of that. But it's an opportunity where the finance staff puts together a presentation. We then record it. We then make a printed copy of the presentation, and then the recorded version online. And you'll see an actual link to that presentation from last year. And so that is our opportunity to literally go out and try to explain to folks the budgeting. At a state level, I mentioned the League of Oregon Cities. Certainly, I represent very aggressively on the City County Managers Association. And the polling of Oregons is don't try to fix something that's broken. And that is the taxation system. The polling shows that they know it's broken, but they don't want to fix it. Folks are fine. And so when you look at some of the data that we'll show you, we'll actually show you where North Bend is, but it could be worse. You could be the city of Lakeside that doesn't even have a property tax. And so when they lost Shutters Creek, they lost all of that enterprise fund through their wastewater treatment plant. And so I mentioned yesterday some of the other governments that use the ARPA money to shore up their budgets and the staff that they've had to cut. We've taken the approach, and certainly the mayor and council is aware that it was like, it's going to take about 5 years. We will get economic development going. We'll start to see some of that increment. And as we see some of that increment, it will allow us then to focus with grants on infrastructure as we go and work collaboratively on a plan so that we don't hit the yodeling, which is, for those not old enough to understand Price is Right, that's when you guess the prices and the little yodeling goes up, but you don't want yodeling to go over. You want them to get as close as possible. And so that's sort of the 5-year projection plan. And so, for instance, one thing that Councilman Pat Gall shared with me today, which I didn't have, but it's pretty doggone cool. I gave you a high level of, there's this new development coming down on the waterfront. It's industrial. Don't get excited. It's not, you know, it's not Olive Garden, and it's not Margaritaville. I was hoping for Margaritaville RV park, but it's not that. But it is tax increment. It is investment. And so you're starting to see when they do the Bangor School, that's investment in our community. When they do have these festivals, those folks are coming here eating. So they're sustaining our restaurants, and all of that tourism money coming in is helping people get by in a community that used to be 100% dependent on timber and a fishing industry. And we're having to redefine ourselves. And that's why the council lent its support to the container ship project on the North Spit, because we have to look at the long-term survivability and sustainability. I learned in economic development early on, if you don't grow, you will die on the vine. And we are not going to die. We are a thriving city, and we're getting better every day.
Excellent.
Just don't expect to put my cheerleader outfit on.
Okay.
All right.
Very good.
Thanks, Chief.
Finance, page 38. Oh,
Huh?
do we need a?
5 minute
break?
break?
92.
We probably have about 6 more questions.
Yeah, that's
Let's take a
We're halfway.
5 minute recess.
I looked down and that's what page I was on. Bye.
your gavel ever again.
Your hands are loose.
We already have.
Okay. Thanks for allowing us a 5-minute recess. So we will now go back in session and continue with the question and answer.
Okay. So next question, are there any plans for the former Sitzlers and are there any plans for north of Pony Mall? Response is 3390 Broadway Avenue at Newmark Avenue. The former Sizzlers is in the demolition process and will eventually be replaced with a 4,000 square foot mini mart structure along with a gas station and
No
EV
Olive Garden.
charging station. The waterfront site across from Pony Village Mall is currently in escrow, and the planned development at that location would be the single largest private investment in North Bend, Coos Bay history.
I don't want to. Oh, is there any questions on that one? I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I was just curious because again, this I've been here since 20 and we do different. And so I asked our former finance director, can you remind me exactly what was going on with the city attorney budget, why we moved it? She said at the time, we'd asked the state, the budget folks at the state, if we had to have a standalone budget for city attorney. They basically said that we needed a reasonable justification for how we arrived to the budget for that line item. That's why we keep notes on the Excel file to show the professional services is broken down and how the attorney costs were being estimated for the year. That's all we have to provide. That's the state guidance on budget law, rather than a separate budget for the attorney. As for historical cost, she says that's just a simple public records request, but council won't file one of those. And then she says it appears the budget's moving along. And so she had actually consulted with the state after guidance from the auditor. So she inherited previous budgets. And so she was looking at, is there any way to consolidate or mainstream some of the budget? And so she had gotten guidance from the state and said, no, these do not have to be standalone. They're not standalone department budgets. And so that's actually why it eliminated in that first budget shortly after I got here. So I wanted to really understand because I know how methodical Jessica was. And so I knew that she didn't just do it willy-nilly.
Yes.
And she documents everything. So I
Yes.
knew. So I just had texted her and got an answer back. So hope that helps and solidify that question.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions on this one?
Yes, just quickly. David, there's an issue with the Pony Village property across from Pony Village. With maybe the Army or the Air Force or the Navy or somebody. Has it been resolved?
I'm not at liberty to say. That's the best way.
That's fine.
Yeah, all conversations on that have been in executive session, so I'm not at liberty to discuss that.
Real estate.
It continues to be under contract and we continue to work forward on moving forward that project. And since we will soon seat a new airport board with new leadership and they have a new city attorney, I'm confident they're going to work through these issues.
Good answer. Thank you.
What is the PERS liability and how much? The city of North Bend offers retirement benefits through the Oregon Public Employees Retirement System, PERS. PERS is a cost-sharing, multiple employer defined benefit pension plan. The city reports a net pension liability for PERS. The net pension liability is the difference between the total pension liability, which is the present value of the projected benefit payments to employees based on their past service, and the assets, the investments reported at fair value that have been set aside and are restricted for paying those benefits. The city's net pension liability for PERS is $5,096,019 based on the most recent audited financial statement, June 30, 2022. It's also noted that actuarial evaluations are performed every 2 years.
Okay, so this was my question as well, because I knew this number was high.
It's a big number.
Can we do anything about the big number? Because that's a big liability.
That liability is an estimate that comes to us from the actuarial work and from PERS. So there is reporting that goes out to cities that is based on the work of actuaries. And there's also a lot of disclosure around the net pension liability and all of the components that go into it. And that number is while it is a big number, it's an estimate. And that estimate could change. And one of the really big factors that one can change on, there's really a couple things. The discount percentage or amount that is used in the discounting of those future benefit payments, discounting those to present value, that discount rate has a huge effect on that pension liability. In fact, when you look at our financial statements, a 1% change forward and back is necessary to disclose, just to give a reader some idea of the magnitude of a change in that discount rate. When you look at what was in our 2022 statements, well, we have a net pension liability of 5.9 million. If that discount rate were to change and go up 1%, that liability doubles. If it goes down 1%, it goes backwards to almost like, like loses $5 million. And so that is one of the factors that is really significant in it. It's one of the reasons why actuarial evaluations are performed every 2 years, so that we're getting updated information on it. So when you see that number, yes, it is big. It may not be a number that we have to come up with like tomorrow. For
Well,
instance, it's a long-term liability.
Is that in here anywhere? I saw your
Sure. So
42,000 on it or
This
something.
year is a small amount. It's a tiny amount this year that we're adding, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. We add a little bit of a reserve to start building a fund for increases in the payments that we may see when it comes to us having to pay more into PERS. And so it's a reserve to help out with that.
So for the public, what would trigger a large increase in PERS?
So if we were to see a large increase in PERS, the benefit payments that are paid out, the number of retirees that are occurring or retirements that are occurring, we're part of this cost sharing multiple employer plan, meaning we're not the only employer or city that is part of it. And so it's a collective net pension liability. And what you're seeing here is kind of our proportionate share of like all of the pension assets and liabilities together. And so, those types of changes, also like some of the other things that might change and increase that would be increases in longevity. So retirees are being paid out longer. That's going to affect the payments and possibly just the fair value of the assets. If they decrease drastically and there aren't the assets there, that could also trigger, and see that liability grow and require more payments.
are we required to put X amount or?
We have contribution rates that we are required to contribute on behalf of our PERS employees.
Mayor, you have
So, one of the reasons, if I understand correctly, one of the reasons why the liability is so high is because of the way that the PERS Tier 1 was designed back in, I guess, the late 80s.
Mhm.
And are we getting to a point where many of those Tier 1 employees are retiring? And like, there's gonna be a peak, right? And then everyone's like, how are we gonna fix this crisis? Well, and after retirement, something else happens later on. And then not that that's a really good 30-year plan. I'm sorry if any of you are on your one person here. But, right, like it's gonna, the liability is going to get worse before it gets better, correct?
It could get worse before it gets better based on a lot of different factors,
Is that
but
how
yes,
much
tier
it
one
is?
had richer benefits than the OPSRT plan. And so that is one factor, but I think collectively, it's all of the factors such as how investments are performing. Longevity is a really significant component that goes into that. If they're having to project and pay out payments longer, that's going to increase it. Also just when an actuary actually does this work, they'll have things for like mortality improvements, disability estimates. And so help improvements overall. They're using projections of all of that to kind of figure out how long are we really going to pay, and they do their best guess of an estimate for that. So I think there's a lot of factors that could influence the liability as well.
Sorry.
Definitely richer benefits is one of them for sure.
One thing that, so to echo what Jeff said is, yes, we are required to make required payments on behalf of the employees. However, prior to my arrival, it was our previous finance director, Jessica Terra, who realized that we actually weren't paying anything towards our liability. And so she had collaboratively worked, for instance, even with the library and the rest of the departments to start making and setting money aside for that. But as you can see from our budget, we don't have a ton of money to set aside. And so we simply just don't allow our employees to retire. And that is my 30-year plan. And so, no, it's as Jeff said, it is a pooled liability, and we get the reports every 2 years, and it allows us to start to make some decisions as to do we do more, do we do less. But that I will tell you that for municipal governments, the Pew Institute, which does independent research nationwide, looks every few years at municipal government pension plans. And the gap actually for most has continued to widen and has gotten greater. And so ours actually has been pretty stable. We have a good solid workforce. We don't have a lot of turnover. And then we have projections of when folks will start to retire. And then we try to, even after they retire, we try to bring them back and continue to keep them as happy employees. Yes, they're still getting their benefits, but they're just solid employees. So and that's allowed under the state. So daunting number without question, because it's larger than what we bring in property taxes in just 1 year. But the positive thing is it's not like a note's going to come due. It will be spread out over a couple of decades, most likely, until, as the mayor says, it sort of kind of resolves itself.
Next question.
It's real.
Will ClearGov give a citizen the ability to do any drill down into the numbers in any charts or tables? Please turn on as much and many drill down opportunities as possible. So ClearGov has several chart options available that can be enabled. For purposes of this budget, we included several that will be visible once the digital book is posted. We will evaluate all of the charts as we progress with developing our expertise in using the ClearGov software. We were careful in this first year to use and stay consistent with the presentation of previous city budgets. There are also report building and chart building components within the software that we envision using and that we will develop over time. The budgets are presented at the account level detail. The account level detail provides the lowest level of budgeting for how we currently budget. It is possible to present budgets at a summarized level by fund with drill down enabled to get to the account level. This is a matter of presentation to consider for future budgets. For example, for materials and services for the gas tax fund, you could present the total budget for materials and services for that fund with then the ability to drill down and see the individual accounts that we are presenting, for instance, within the fiscal year 24 budget.
Which you talked about earlier. As far as like the gas card thing. So, yeah.
That's awesome. That's great.
Where can we see a top level chart or table that shows how the 38 million total budget is divided into the 6 fund types listed on page 1 of the budget message? It is possible to include a top level fund type summary for resources and expenditures. Time permitting, staff will try to incorporate such a chart into the budget. The net budget increase of over $6 million, where does this money come from? To answer a resident question, how can you just increase the budget by $6 million? It is possible to do a detailed all fund summary, but it would take time to develop externally from ClearGov. We inquired of ClearGov about generating such a report and found that the company anticipates release of a comprehensive all fund summary page that will be available to us in the not too distant future. The ClearGov account representative showed me an example of this page on their test company, and it appeared to be very useful and informative. I believe this feature will be useful to explain the changes between funds, their revenues, and expenditures on a year-to-year basis. Annual budgets are going to increase or decrease based on a variety of factors that include the sources and purposes of revenues, the configuration of city operations, staffing and market pricing for goods and services. It would be helpful to provide insights into the budgetary document, having such a macro view of the budget. And can we show a percent increase year over year for citizens to show how much costs increase over the Social Security increase? Show citizens why we need to approve higher fees. So for the budgets, it is possible to include a percentage change column to see how budgets are either increasing or decreasing over time. One limitation of the software, however, is the fitting a large number of columns on a single budget page. Oregon requires that we show certain columns in our budget. There are 2 additional columns that will be added to the fiscal year 24 budget for an approved budget and an adopted budget. So, this question also triggered a discussion about like our fees and them being tied to the Social Security cost of living adjustments. And so what we have here in front of us is a historical view of kind of what those cost of living adjustments for Social Security have been over a large number of years. And you can see it bounces, quite dramatically all over the place. And then there's some years where there is no increase. And so when you compare this requirement for a fee, and then you look at, for instance, inflation, or you look at the cost of living adjustments that we've been discussing, those items for inflation and cost of living don't match up with this. In fact, if we were to look at a line, I believe that those were items like inflation or for our cost of living adjustments, they're going to be higher than what's on here. And so we are limited pretty severely, I think, in the way we can increase fees, and it is a problem.
It is, because inflation continues on. Can't stop it.
We also have a point about payment, for staff, right? Like,
Absolutely.
it's the same with, like wastewater, right? We're not feeing out what it really costs, inside the fiscal year.
So it's interesting you mentioned wastewater, because we responded to a question today that came into the mayor about wastewater. And they're like, you know, why do you keep increasing our rates? Why are you increasing the fees? And so folks don't recognize that we can only increase the fees once a year. It's done in a public meeting with public hearings. Forget the fact of cost of living. All right. So you look at these rates, and so if salaries and benefits is your largest, so you know, just 3, 4, or 5% COLAs versus what the fees will bring in. So it's a constant. We tried in great detail, which is why we had this data handy, because we shared it with the citizen to show this is the historical amounts since the charter amendment went into place. And when you get your water bill, the wastewater goes up and down, very much like this chart, not because of this, but because of your water usage. And so wastewater is built. And so she's like, you keep raising my wastewater rates, when in reality, she's using more water. So I actually suggested in this response, conserve your water, stop using water, stop drinking, stop doing something, don't wash your car. Because that's the real reason. Forget the fact that I also say that we have the second lowest wastewater rates on the coast, because we actually, without voter approval, cannot get them to where they should be to pay for the infrastructure. And that's called deferred maintenance. In fact, I was talking to someone today from Bandon Dunes, who they had bought a residential facility. And they said the first thing is we had to take care of a lot of deferred maintenance. Well, that's kicking the can down the road. That's really what we're doing about all of the sewer pipes and stormwater pipes under the ground. We do not. So I love the fact of the pension question of the unfunded liability. But I could also put in the budget the fact that we have a much greater unfunded liability of our roads or our sewer lines or our buildings. And so, and that is not money that's going to materialize, at least not in any way that I know of, unless I mean, we all start buying lottery tickets, or, you know, take the budget and put it on red or green and hope for the best.
We have to apply for a grant.
Apply for a grant.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's a fascinating thing. There are no grants to improve your roads.
Nope.
And most grants are not for operational. So they're not even going to pay, you know, if you can get operational, you take them where you can get them. But yeah, and so that's why I try to emphasize, you know, Jeff, was it just north of 9 million, the number? Was it north of 7 million? I forget. Maybe north of 7 million, give or take, on grants that we're showing. So in the last 2.5 years, we have north of $7 million of grants that have come into the city. If what we anticipate coming in, we anticipate hopefully north of 6 million this year. Put it in perspective. And then you know what we bring in property taxes. And so it's a necessity that we do this in order to get the city to the point that we're not nickeled and dimed and we're not having to cut positions. So Social Security COLAs. All right, let's drink that and go to the next one, because that's even gets better, because it goes back to a question that was asked and sort of a comment that was made.
Yeah, so let's talk, you know, in terms of, like, you know, the COLA limitations. Like, we also have and face pretty severe limitations on our property taxes. And so what we have here is a chart for you for the fiscal year 2022 and 2023 for property taxes for the city of North Bend. And what we want to show with this is that if you look at the assessor's website, we have real market value of, I believe that's $1,441,981,952. we're only able to tax on the assessed value, which is 818,130,102. So the bottom block here is really that untaxed value. I mean, that's almost kind of like almost as much as the assessed value
Yeah.
that we're unable to tax. And so it really illustrates how we are limited when it comes to property taxes.
And that's because you lock in your rate. You buy it, you lock in your rate. So everybody who's purchased already is subsidized by future development or future property turnover.
Sort of,
That's the
kind of.
key.
You can buy a house and the rate's still locked in. So for instance, unless I renovate or expand my house and trigger a building permit that will assess, it won't get reassessed. And so
Wow.
we bought a house that, you know, they didn't do anything since so that's locked in. And then on the assessed value, the part that is not shown on the county site is I then have to pull out, although they don't in the data they provide, is the properties then that are tax exempt,
Right.
that are still real market. I mean, it's market, but then they show what we're assessed. But then what you don't see is the coded that, well, they're tax exempt and so they don't pay.
Wow.
What is the urban renewal excess value? Which is a negative value.
Where you're seeing that,
On
It's probably on the
page
chart on the
which one? Page
6.
6. Let me look real quick.
It's in your budget message.
The uncollected 6.5%. Is that what you're referring to?
Negative one. It's
No,
the
that's
second
urban
one.
renewal.
Oh, the urban excess value. Okay. When we get to the urban renewal agency, if you'll hold off, we'll explain that. But it's called the tax increment within that district. And so we'll briefly go over that when we move to the URA budget. So if you be patient with me,
Right.
you'll get your answer.
And who's collecting the uncollected tax?
Nobody is.
Yeah. Yeah, they basically, Jeff will tell you that the two of us went to the courthouse steps for a tax sale because basically it takes about 7 years for the county to put you on the steps. You can get, I believe it's like at most 3 years in the arrears. By year 4, they start to say, hey. And so if you just catch up that 1 year, but if you get beyond that, then they go through a process, and at year 7, they'll put you on the courthouse steps. And so we went to the most recent tax sale, and it's rather interesting to sit there and watch. And we kind of learned stuff and had some fun. But that's what happens to those
Tax liens.
yeah, they sell it off to the highest bidder.
Yeah,
You have to have.
Oh, yeah.
to pay, yeah.
that's right.
Yeah,
Pay my taxes.
we're convinced that one guy had all cash in that
And
suitcase.
that's why it's done collected.
Yeah.
I had wanted to kind of make a point about that, like, and I don't know, just because I always have these grand ideas that everybody in North Bend is listening to this budget meeting right now. And that we not say a word, but that's why it was so important to make, when the URA made the acquisition of the annex building.
Yes.
Is because it's not like what people think, that it's when you buy a new house, it gets recessed. You can, I think David and I even talked about like having a map one day, very clear where the new neighborhoods are in North Bend with very few. So basically, those houses down on Roosevelt Loop are carrying the burden of the tax bill for the city of North Bend. And so, but when you have opportunities like this, where the URA saw that and is getting the annex, it's tearing it down, it's the first time that when that gets ready to be built on, that'll be the first time in 100 years that goes back on the tax rolls.
Correct,
That's a
because
big
it's a
wow.
public building.
Wow.
I
Wow.
thought that the certified boundary, certified by the county assessor, that everything in that property, everything within that boundary keeps its tax deferred all the taxes on that, all the increase in property taxes go into the UR fund until the whole thing is sunsets. And it had been a 20-year period, and now it's maximum indebtedness, which I still haven't wrapped my head around. But my understanding is no, it will not until the whole urban renewal plan and district is terminated by, I guess it would be an ordinance or something.
You want to explain that?
So inside the district, any new, so it goes back on the tax rolls. And,
I don't think
well,
so.
okay,
I
well,
don't know,
okay. I'm just finalizing my Oregon Economic Development Association state certification, so maybe I don't know. I'll go back to that class. But I try to give you good advice. All properties go back on the tax roll, and the tax increment goes to the district as approved.
understand, because it was a government and now it won't be.
Correct.
In that, I understand, I misunderstood the statement, and so it will go back on the tax rolls. The money, the tax increments will still go to the UR district,
Yes,
but it won't be a government.
it
entity
still is
that doesn't pay
taxed.
taxes.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize.
Everyone in the district pays taxes unless it's tax exempt. Okay,
So you're
we're good.
But I still don't understand, what is it, maximum indebtedness, but.
Yes, and that's a percentage. That is a percentage of the total properties in the URA versus the entire tax pool. And so that is a percentage. And so the indebtedness is that calculation figure. And so as you bring in money and you spend it down, the governing body, the URA, can reset the indebtedness based on that percentage to the total whole of properties in the URA district. And I'll gladly sit down one day if you want and show you a calculation, because the finance director and I have been talking about we should soon come back to the governing body and reset the maximum indebtedness. It's time to do it. And we'll explain why. But yes, our URA is in perpetual motion, and it's going to take 16 million plus to get this project done, and then to be able to sell it and turn it back over. So
It was going to originally, it was supposed to sunset in 2014.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so what happens is if it does sunset, that money comes back in the general fund. And then basically we exhaust it to get to the Yodely all over again. And then you have no money to invest back into your district. So it's double-edged sword. But the URA and the council standing tall behind that right now, which is good.
Okay. And then finally, with the 2022 and 2023 like tax comparison, if you want to look at the lowest to highest in terms of cities here in Coos County, you can see where North Bend or the city of North Bend taxpayers rank on that list, and it's actually at the lower end of the tax burden.
So we can't see who's on the bottom or on the higher.
Coos Bay.
There's only one way.
Exactly.
There we go.
You should have guessed.
I just wanted to see. Yeah. And is that because of their stormwater or their wastewater fund?
Overall, when you look at all of their funds, and so for instance, if you look at their overall indebtedness, so this historically looking back at all the budgets, this is a city that for the most part has done pay as you go. We have very little debt. They have done various bond levies. They have the stormwater, the wastewater. They potentially, have looked at the library, things of that nature. And so when you look at their finances versus our finances, I don't want to say we're better off than them, but we they're closer to the Yodely than we are. That's
There you
probably
go.
the best way
Okay.
to say.
I can accept that.
Yeah. And And for instance, we know that, they're running $1 million deficit every year moving forward. That's only getting larger on their public safety.
Right.
And so, but whereas we have the public safety fee kicking in $15, they have $10 kicking in. They have a larger population, and so they're putting theirs into roads.
Right.
So it explains why their public safety fee is
And they
growing.
also have some revenue from timber sales on
They-
the water board property.
Timber sales helps them. And so, yeah, so each city is unique, but we have a lot in common, but we also have different. And so, yes, when you look at their debt levels versus ours, two different things. I always hate that terrible, word that, in fact, it came up. I was at Whiskey Run. They're like, well, why don't you just get together and combine and you'll save taxpayers all this money. Okay. Well, the reason North Bend consistently votes it down is not because we're Bulldogs. Yes, that's got a big, huge part to it. Go Bulldogs.
I think this.
But there's a reason right there. And you do the math on your property. If your property is assessed at 100,000, divide that by 1,000, multiply it by, the difference here between the two tax rates, and you'll see what your tax bill difference is.
And instead of me taking a picture of that slide with my phone, and I request to have that, I'd love to.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I think little small pieces of like slides and graphs and things like that are so good to like share out to the public
Yes.
when we can, whether it be like a, Instagram next door.
What are the units on this? Is this dollars per thousand in your property value?
This is
Or-
per $1,000 evaluation of your assessed value.
Okay,
So
And the North Bend rate, that includes like City of North Bend, Urban Renewal
Yeah.
Agency, and the swimming pool.
Okay.
With a
Yeah.
combined rate.
thank you.
And so keep in mind, this is 2022, 2023. And so all calculations here are done by the county tax assessor. And so if there's any
They does.
Money's there. You get a small restaurant.
Do it.
You have more money for other things.
We are back. Technical difficulties fixed. Thank you, Macy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You got outside yourself.
I do have printed copies if any of
Well, if anything happens
members of
again.
the
we'll
budget
certainly-
committee would like a copy.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, printing copies now.
I do.
Woo, hot off.
Okay, so next question, and this is, I believe, the last question. For future budget meetings, a tutorial on how money flows. Can the budget presentation, it should include 2 slides, one for revenue and one for how revenues are used. And the response is suggestion is noted for next year's budget presentation. The city revenues come from a variety of sources that are each unique. And it would be useful to a reader of the budget to know in order to gain a better understanding of the budget. And then we have a link to a video that was, I believe, a presentation done by Jessica Terra, the former finance director, titled "Ever Wonder Where Your North Bend Property Tax Dollars Go?" And there's a link to that video, and it is a really good video and
It
presentation.
is, yeah. Mhm.
Should we email that out to the budget committee? Because they're not going to memorize that link.
We certainly can email it out, yes.
Y'all are actually going to get this
Okay.
whole presentation.
Fantastic.
So with that,
Thank you, bye.
that's the end of our questions.
There's more work.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was very informative.
Mhm.
You're welcome.
So, this brings us to number 9, which is committee deliberation and decision.
We do URA yet, or does that come after? Okay.
So,
I'll get us to discussion. I move to approve the fiscal year 24 proposed budget document.
Second.
okay, we have a motion and a second. Shall I read the proposed tax rate? And that right now? Okay, I just want to make sure this is appropriate time. So it was made a motion and a second to approve the City of North Bend fiscal year 24 proposed budget in the amount of $49,095,100 and a tax rate of 6.831 per assessed value. So that was the motion and the second. Is that correct? I think it's correct. So, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
How about
Aye.
the folks online?
Tina's.
Tina's online.
What say you, Tina?
Aye.
Thank you, Tina. Welcome, by the way. Sorry I didn't
Yeah.
address you earlier. Okay, and also the next one would be for the pool. And that would be 56 cents per 1,000 assessed value. Do I need a motion on that?
What was the assessed value?
56 cents per $1,000 assessed value.
Okay, I move for the pool levy to be 56 cents per 1,000 assessed value, 1,000 assessed value. I move.
Second. We have a second.
Okay.
Any discussion on that? Yes. Okay. Any discussion?
Are we ever gonna get done with the pool? Like people actually be able to swim in it?
Oh, yeah.
June 1st.
You're first.
June 1st.
June 1st.
Yeah.
Well, there's a party of the 31st.
Right.
And
So-
June 1st it opened.
Yeah, and you
Okay.
should have gotten your invitation, right?
Yeah.
There you
Okay,
go.
because that you need that to get in, so
So it's a happening.
Yeah.
So,
that's a golden ticket.
They're talking past the pass the bond of how we're gonna keep on it, right? Because it's like, it's a hole in the ground to throw money, you know?
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor of the pool levy or pool taxing? Say aye.
I,
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Tina? Oh,
Hi.
Thank you, Tina. Sorry. Okay. So, being that said, I think we can adjourn this meeting.
Yes.
And
do we have to do?
we have the, oh, we have here. So. I would like to call the order the North Bend Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee regular meeting for Wednesday, May 17th. Second on our thing, we have elections, presiding officer and secretary. Are there any recommendations?
Yeah, recommend the existing, sorry. I talked over top of you, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I think I talked over top of you. That's what I'm sorry about.
Oh, that's fine.
I'm going to recommend that we have our existing speaker and secretary from our previous session chair this one.
I second the motion.
Which is,
You. And you. Okay, so let's see, wait a minute.
You're still on. Bill and Anthony are the
Yes.
officer and secretary.
I second the motion that Bill is our presiding officer and Anthony is our secretary.
okay, discussions, volunteers?
Great job, keep going.
Okay, all right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Tina?
Opposed?
Tina?
Hi.
Thank you, Tina. I'm sorry. Motion carries. So next we have number 3 is the approval of the minutes of the May 18th, 2022. Is there anything on there that anybody needs to discuss before I entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the URA budget meeting minutes from 2022.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion on those minutes? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Hi.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. So next we have the presentation of the fiscal year 2024 budget message. Executive Director Miller, please.
Thank you. The North Bend Urban Renewal Agency is a separate and distinct public corporation in Oregon. The URA was formed to redevelop underutilized and blighted areas in portions of North Bend. While a separate and distinct agency was created according to Oregon statute, the governing body consists of the same group of people as the North Bend City Council. This is common among URAs throughout Oregon. The agency and its activities are funded by tax increment financing. The North Bend URA is a separate and distinct public corporation in Oregon. It was formed to redevelop. Is that a copy and paste of the same thing? Oops.
Maybe so.
Didn't it sound like I was like reading the same thing? Okay, ignore all that. Okay, so.
Among you, right, yeah.
Proposed fiscal year 2024 budget, total resources budgeted for fiscal year 2023-2024, total $3,735,000. This represents a 1.4% decrease from the prior fiscal year. The revenue includes working capital interest earnings, tax revenues, and prior year tax revenues. It is anticipated that the North Bend URA will receive $850,000 in tax revenue in fiscal year 23-24, $26,000 in prior year taxes, and $14,000 in interest earnings. As of July 1st, 2023, the budget projects working capital to be $2,845,200. In line with the goals of the City Council and the Urban Renewal Agency, the funding priorities for fiscal year 23-24 budget will total $3,735,000 as follows. Library restoration will be $1,250,000. In 2020, the North Bend Public Library completed an initial architectural and engineering assessment on the existing facility located at 1800 Sherman Avenue in the URA district. This assessment and the final report demonstrated a significant need for renovation at the facility. In April 2021, the URA issued a call for statements of qualifications from firms with substantial architectural, engineering, and construction management experience on similar public works improvements to provide such service to the agency for the renovation of the North Bend Public Library. The project includes refurbishing the existing portion of the library. Community development is $1,750,000. What is community development? The URA board is and has been involved in securing properties for larger revitalization and redevelopment. And so that is for the purchase and renovation and revitalization of properties that are purchased and authorized by the URA board. The Visitor Information Center, in commingling efforts to bring the Visitor Information Center to downtown, the URA and through the City Council, the Visitor Information Center using transient lodging taxes or tourism tax, folks that stay at hotels, motels, etc., engaged in the purchase of the properties at the intersection of California and 101. Some may know that as the old Milburn gas station. Some may know that as the original DMV/Sevens and Coffee building. And tomorrow morning, starting at approximately 8 to 8:30, you'll see a demolition crew out there, and they'll be demolishing the old gas station and the blue building and all of that fence on that intersection. However, we still have to renovate the asset that is owned by the Urban Renewal Agency, which is the Visitor Information Center. And so this is a contribution which is also being matched up. If you look in funding from the Visitor TLT, the URA has been unsuccessful thus far in acquiring the desired property. So it has acquired that property and now needs to renovate it. We also have reserved in here $250,000 towards grant programs. The URA has two grant programs, one for facade grants, one for revitalization. The facade grant, all these grants come before the URA board. The facade grant is a matching grant up to $25,000. And so you have seen multiple of those. For instance, Gino's Pizza is an example of a facade grant. You have seen the revitalization grant. Wildflower would be an example of a revitalization grant. And that's where we target buildings or locations that are we want to sort of propel or be desirable, and they will renovate them. They'll be using urban renewal money. There are matching requirements, but then it increments the tax base, and then of course we benefit with the money coming back into the tax rolls. In that fund, we also have materials and services, and you'll notice a line item for grant writing for $42,900. And so that is the proposed budget. Projects that are in play currently that are URA assets. The annex building is a URA building. The land where the event tent is a URA property. What we call the salvage yard or the fenced in yard that the police department uses to securely keep towed vehicles or other assets in is a URA asset. those two properties came as a combined deal when the URA bought the annex for $125,000. The Milburn property, which is abutting California and 101, is URA owned, and the vacant lot next to that, abutting the shrunk strip mall center, is a URA property. And we anticipate huddling very shortly with the URA board on another project, which is moving forward. And next steps is once we secure the funding, the $4 million funding from feds, which we anticipate, there is a process we're going through, but we should be demolishing the annex in 2025. And I know it sounds like a long time, but same thing with the Bangor schools, on the same trajectory as we are, because that's just the way the government works. But they'll be demolishing and building in 2025. So we believe that the trajectory is about right, that we should be acquiring some additional property and then demolishing properties and building mixed use and housing in the URA district. And so in order to accomplish that, you have the presented budget. Just because the money there doesn't mean that it all gets spent, because again, you don't know in a given year what may come available as part of the larger URA plan. We go after blighted properties and we try to revitalize them and renovate them. And so revitalization is constant. And so that those funds are there. And then I mentioned in one of the, actually a side conversation, but I'll bring it to the table. At one point, I do believe that we'll come before the city council and the URA and we will reset our maximum indebtedness. And that's part of the process of looking at the total amount of real market value. And there's a percentage as to what you can do as maximum indebtedness, so that each year as you bring in increment, you can pay down any debt. URAs are supposed to be in debt or not. But we have been very aggressively investing in properties. And so for instance, the Emporium downtown is a perfect example of the URA's investment and has beautified the old music store. You have the downtown Christmas decorations and wreath that have really brought the downtown alive during the holidays. You have had the wildflower downtown. You've had and then the next really big phase of the project will be concentrating on the visitor information center. The demolition comes first. Staff is working on the request for proposals in order to go out and get the contractor bids to then renovate that building. And then we anticipate by fall that the visitor information center will relocate ahead of our holiday event and be fully functional downtown.
Wow.
And so that's where we're headed. Long term, we want to relocate the boxcar downtown and make that a destination. And we also have put funds and will be seeking additional grant funds for what we call a pocket park. And the goal is to be able, Shrunk has already given us permission to do a mural on the side of his building, because when you demolish it, you're going to see his building. So as you're coming down, we want to see a mural. And I did some research and I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't know this, but they had amended the URA guidelines before I got here. But I found this document looking for something else where facade in the facade grant program is a line item for murals. I didn't know, I didn't know that. And so that's exciting.
They used on the
And,
terminal, right?
And so, and then, last but not least, we want, some public restrooms down there. So we'll be coming back to the URA at some point, with some of that to further, our downtown community. Do you want to say anything about the library project? Because that's the biggest expense.
Come on down. That's Bob Mercury would say.
Thank
Third
you.
floor of the library.
Good evening. So the library facility is located in the urban renewal district. And from my perspective as the library director, I do believe that it is a good investment of urban renewal funds to restore our library building. Last night, I spoke to you about the high numbers of people that engage in library services. And if a community chooses to incorporate its library into its urban core, it can be very beneficial across the board. I'm sure all of you all have probably heard and seen in the past that businesses, investors looking at communities and trying to determine where they want to place their businesses do look at things like libraries and schools because they help determine quality of life. And those folks who are coming down for library programs and events, they are also having lunch out in town and visiting local businesses. And the library's meeting spaces, which will be a key part of our restoration, are frequently used by our downtown businesses for meetings and staff trainings. And so I feel like the library is an important part of our urban core. In terms of an update on our status for that project, right now staff are reviewing a more comprehensive design for the renovation of the library that would include significant improvements to the facade that would not only improve the look of the library, make it more attractive, it would also eliminate some long, persistent maintenance issues. Architectural features of the original design that have proven problematic in our local environment, usually related to weather and wear and tear on the building. So we're looking to not only improve the usability of the facility, make it attractive for our visitors, but also eliminate some of the items or features of the building that are creating a lot of long-term maintenance costs for the city to take on. I expect that after staff review, those designs will be ready to move forward for input from the Urban Renewal Agency this summer. And so we are making significant progress on that project. And as David has mentioned, we are pursuing lots of grants to support that. And so this allocation within the Urban Renewal Agency budget will serve as community support and local investment whenever we go to make those grant applications.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes my presentation to the budget committee. Thank you.
Okay. Well, looks like we're getting down to the. I gotta get that here. I turn these pages 15 ways.
You have public comment or
We do. Do we have any public comment?
We do not.
Okay, which we can move on to committee deliberation and decision. So I will read the proposed motions. We're going to need a first and second on the approval of the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget of $3,735,200. And the fiscal year 24 tax rate to the maximum allowed by Coos County. I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the fiscal year 24 proposed budget alongside the fiscal year 24 tax rate to be the maximum allowed by Coos County.
Do we have
and
a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions, comments?
Comment that it's really exciting things that we're doing with the URA, and I think this is critical to all the other things that we need to do to eventually raise the tax base and And so I'm really proud of the council and the URA for believing in those initiatives.
Yeah, one of the big deals in the library, she's not bragging on it, but one of the proposed changes is kind of shifting juvenile fiction and getting young adults or teens a space. And I got a 21 and 20-year-old, and they grew up in that building, and they spent a heck of a lot of time there, 12 and under, and not so much. And I kind of handcuffed my kid to the library, and, you know, she just couldn't get her friends or this or that, or, you know, so we have the potential for a real service for our teenage residents that we just don't, outside the school district, we don't have a lot of options for them. So I think the potential is great for the library.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Go ahead.
Larry, I see Larry's on.
There's there.
Tina,
Aye.
Larry,
Aye.
thank you, sir. Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Thank you for all your work, and thank you, staff, for everything that you've provided to us. And
Yes, thank you.
if there's anything else? Being adjourned.
Here's the budget document.